I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby held a press briefing on Tuesday and took questions about Ukraine and Somalia. He discussed the Ukrainian evacuation of the steel plant in Mariupol after it appeared they'd given up the fight for the city. He also spoke about President Biden's decision to send U.S. forces back into Somalia as part of counterterrorism operations. Take a listen to his comments.
Army Forces Command's independent review into civilian casualties that occurred on the 18th of March 2019 in the vicinity of Baghuz, Syria. The Secretary issued a memorandum to the services and the combatant commands reaffirming the importance of timely reporting and intimate command oversight of civilian casualty allegations and incidents. Now, while the Secretary remains confident that leaders across the department continue to share his commitment to protecting innocent civilians in the conduct of our operations, he was, as he communicated to the department, disappointed to learn that several aspects of this particular review missed deadlines, accepted informational deficiencies that prevented making complete assessments, and were left open for many months. His memo today laid out 5 clear steps that he expects leaders to take to avoid such delays in the future. Now, by now, you should have all received copies of both the Secretary's memo as well as General Garrett's summary of the Baghuz review in your inbox. Both are also going to be available, if they aren't already, on defense.gov, our website. So preserving our valuable time here together, I'm going to refrain from reading them all out to you in detail. But I do encourage you to go review both General Garrett's executive summary as well as the Secretary's memo, which again lays out the review's methodologies, the key findings, accompanying recommendations, and of course the specific direction that the Secretary has given now to the department. Both of those documents and outcomes will be fully incorporated into the department's broader civilian harm mitigation and response action plan, which was directed by the Secretary back in January. Chris Mayer, the Assistant Secretary for Special Operations and Low-Intensity Conflict, is hard at work on getting the work of that Civilian Harm Mitigation and Response Action Plan done and getting his team in place. That work is ongoing. Switching topics to suicide, it obviously remains a challenging issue here in the department and, of course, across the country. Back in March, you might remember that the Secretary established the Suicide Prevention and Response Independent Review Committee to conduct a comprehensive review of the department's efforts to address and prevent suicide in the military. Today, we're announcing that the committee will be led by Dr. Gail Iwamasa, a leading expert in mental health from the Department of Veterans Affairs. She will be joined by committee members who are experts in their own respective fields and who collectively represent a public health approach to suicide. They will be supported by consultants who will add critical perspectives in the areas of officer and enlisted leadership, the needs and perspectives of our military families, and the role of chaplains in suicide prevention. With that, the committee members are in Washington this week to begin their work, and in July they will start visits to the installations that were named in the on-site installation evaluation report back in March, which we've talked about. The review of these initial installations will yield recommendations for the department that can be applied across our force. The committee's initial report is due to the Secretary in December. Their final report and recommendations are due to Congress in February of next year. The list of members and special consultants, the committee's charter, and the projected dates for site visits will be posted on defense.gov. Moving over to NATO, Naval Striking and Support Forces NATO, and U.S. Navy 6th Fleet in Europe. We kicked off the NATO-led activity Neptune Shield today. This activity increases the pace and flexibility of command and control of U.S. naval and amphibious forces between 6th Fleet, the Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group operating in the Mediterranean Sea, USS Kearsarge Amphibious Ready Group that's operating in the Baltic Sea, along with the embarked 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit, all be placed under NATO operational control through the end of May. And this activity will serve as a centerpiece for fostering NATO allies' ability to cooperate and integrate effectively. The Neptune Shield 22 follows previous activities, Neptune Challenge in October 2021 and Neptune Strike in January to February of earlier this year. Finally, scheduling-wise, the Secretary will be returning this evening from his trip to the UAE. He will meet various counterparts the remainder of this week. Tomorrow, He will meet with the Swedish defense minister. On Thursday, he will meet with the Spanish defense minister as well as the Israeli defense minister. And then on Friday, he'll meet with his Colombian counterpart. We'll have, obviously, photo sprays and access at the beginning of these meetings, as well as readouts after the fact. And with that, take questions. Lita, thank you for bearing with me.
So just one on Baghuz. It appears that he found that there were no violations of law of war, et cetera, but were there no findings that anyone either got a letter of reprimand or anything in these multiple failures for filing not on time, et cetera, et cetera?
No, the General Garrett did not see the need, because of the process, the compliance deficiencies, he did not find a need to have personal accountability for those.
Okay, and then just on Ukraine, Mariupol appears either fallen or on the brink of falling. What is the U.S. assessment of sort of the impact of that at this point? And do you believe that the city is actually now under complete Russian control?
I would point you back to what the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense said themselves, which is that the combat mission in Mariupol has ended. I think we certainly would defer to them, the Ukrainians, to define what's going on there. And look, no question that the civilians that were stuck there at the plant, who have finally been able to get out, and the soldiers that continued to resist there, did so bravely and skillfully, and it's quite admirable to think how long they were able to hold out. And President Zelensky referred to them as heroes. I think we would all agree with that. What this means is difficult to know at this particular time, and I want to be careful not to speak to Russian intent here or their planning process. But we have long talked about the significance of Mariupol as a major economic port on the Sea of Azov, and also geographically relevant to the fighting in the east, sort of at the southern end of of where the Donbass region cuts across the extreme east of Ukraine. And we have long talked about the fact that we believe the Russians were going to try to encircle Ukrainian troops that are in the Donbass region and in the east, and to be able to free up forces to do that from the south meant Mariupol was important to them. So again, I'll let the Ukrainians speak to the mission itself, but it's clear that the Russians still have an intent here to encircle and to occupy the Donbass and the eastern part of the country. I would add, Lita, that they have not succeeded in that. Mariupol aside, the fighting still goes on in the Donbass. There's a lot of back and forth. It's a very, as we say at the Pentagon, it's a kinetic fight. There's a lot going on still there, and the Ukrainians are still putting up a very stiff resistance in towns and villages throughout the Donbass. Jen?
John, in terms of these reports, going back to the Baghuz report, how come nobody is ever punished when these reports come out? There's never any accountability.
Jen, I think, and you've been covering the Pentagon a long time, you know that we take leadership and accountability very seriously here. I'm not going to, I couldn't begin and wouldn't try to chronicle every single incident of civilian casualties over the past years an example. What I can talk about here today is Baghuz. And the reason why the Secretary wanted a 4-star who wasn't connected to the operation in any way to review it was to make sure that we got it right in terms of how this operation was conducted and how it was investigated and dealt with after the fact. And he has complete trust and confidence in the work that General Garrett did. And General Garrett looked at this exhaustively over the course of many months to make sure that he could properly understand what happened. And he did not find, and he's laid it out in that exec sum that you can see for yourself. He did not find that anybody acted outside the law of war, that there was no malicious intent, that the ground force commander given the information he had at the time, made the best decisions he could in the moment against a very aggressive ISIS force. And he also found that after the fact, there were deficiencies in the way this was investigated and processed. So I think while we don't always get everything right, we do try to improve. We do try to be as transparent as we can about what we learn, and we're standing up here taking questions about it. And not that I don't want to. Well, I'll just leave it at that.
And just as a follow-up, there's a new DoD IG report on Afghanistan. There are a series of reports about to come out about the withdrawal from Afghanistan. And one of the conclusions is that ISIS-K is on the rise there in recruiting, and that there's an assessment that in the next 12 to 24 months, this is a CENTCOM assessment, that the al-Qaeda will be given greater freedom of movement by the Taliban in Afghanistan. Doesn't this suggest that the withdrawal was a mistake, was a failure, and what are you going to do about it with the rise of al-Qaeda and ISIS-K being documented in your own DoD IG report?
We had long said that it was possible that groups like ISIS-K and even al-Qaeda could try to find a renewed foothold in Afghanistan with our departure from Afghanistan. But I don't believe that we would at all agree that our departure from Afghanistan was a mistake. Our troops had fought there for 20 years, had accomplished the mission for which they were sent. There has been no 9/11-like attack on the United States since the attack that emanated from Afghanistan. And in the process, we certainly made improvements in Afghanistan. We've talked about this so much since the summertime, Jen, but the president made the absolute right decision that it was time for that war to end, time to bring the rest of those troops home, and that staying and therefore violating the Doha Agreement was only going to require putting more troops back in contact with the Taliban and lead to an extension of a war.
But this says on page 14, the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, assesses that ISIS-K could direct attacks against the U.S. homeland within the next year. That seems to me like a problem.
We noted that groups like ISIS-K could try to reconstitute themselves, and that's why we're working continually on making sure we've got a strong over-the-horizon counterterrorism capabilities, why we're working with partner nations to be able to do that. And it's not like we don't, it's not like, I mean, you just read something right from DIA, from the Defense Intelligence Agency, which ought to tell you exactly my point, which is we are watching this. We are monitoring this. We're not just sitting idly by waiting for another group to be able to develop a capability. And we have over-the-horizon capabilities to deal with that.
You don't have anyone on the ground, and so you're going to have more CIVCAS, which is related to the Baghuz report.
Why would we have more
Because
CIVCAS?
if you don't have anyone on the ground to actually spot, how are you going to go after?
Again, Jen, we've talked about the fact that over-the-horizon counterterrorism is going to be more difficult. It's not impossible, but it is going to be more difficult. And I actually take issue with the presumption that just because we don't have people on the ground, that's going to lead to more civilian casualties. We haven't done a strike in Afghanistan since we left. We haven't felt the need to do that. And it's not about hitting every single terrorist in Afghanistan anytime you want. It's about metering over-the-horizon capabilities for direct threats and attacks to our interests and to our country, and we just haven't seen that materialize yet. But the fact that you read it from DIA tells you, or should tell you, that we are keeping an eye on this. We are watching this, and that's not all that different than what General Milley or Secretary Austin said months ago in congressional testimony. Yeah, Orrin.
John, this report focuses on the Baghuz strike, but if you look back at Afghanistan, even with the Secretary's focus on civilian casualties, there appears to be a pattern emerging here of no one being held accountable. What does it take for accountability to be imposed or for someone to be held accountable for civilian casualties? Because you seem to be saying that, look, as long as there's no malicious intent, the number is irrelevant of civilian casualties.
No, well, we've never said that, Orrin. And again, I think we would take issue with that. I mean, we're standing up here talking about civilian casualties. You don't see that coming out of Ukraine. You don't see that coming out of the Russian Ministry of Defense. We're actually answering for it. And we're releasing an unclassified summary of a classified report on civilian casualties. Of course we take it seriously. We wouldn't, wait a second, we wouldn't have stood up a civilian harm and mitigation response action plan if we didn't want to get better at this. But in the accountability business, and again, I'm not going to relitigate every single incident of civilian casualties, but it's war, it's combat. And ground force commanders or commanders in general aren't always going to have perfect visibility, the kind of visibility that General Garrett had, a couple of years now after this strike. And we have to have a high bar for accountability on something like this, given that it was in the midst of combat, in the fog of war. And if you can prove that an individual deliberately caused civilian casualties and violated the laws of war, which we actually take seriously and the Russians don't, then of course there would be cause for holding people accountable. Absolutely. But if in the review, as General Garrett did, a review of a previous investigation, and neither of which found that the ground force commander or anybody involved in that strike violated the laws of war or acted inappropriately or acted with malicious intent, deliberately wanted to and sought out to kill civilians, then you tell me, should they be held accountable? If they were simply doing what their mission required them to do in accordance with the laws of war. I think that's a pretty clear standard. Yeah, Tom.
Hi, John. I have two distinct questions. I'd like to ask them separately, if I may, to give you the full opportunity to address them in a robust manner. My first question is a follow-up to Jen and him. You're talking about, a review of what happened and no violations of the law of war. I want to focus on what you said about Secretary Austin being upset, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, upset at the lack of timeliness and some of the reporting that went on by the individuals involved in the Syria strike.
He said he was disappointed.
Disappointed. Okay, thank you. Those individuals, in other words, those individuals at the time, not those involved in making the decisions on the field, which you've addressed, but those individuals who failed to be timely in their reporting, sloppy in their reporting, etc., in their reporting, could they be held accountable for that type of action?
It's a hypothetical question, Tom. I mean, yes, it is.
You have a report
Tom,
now, and
Tom.
we're talking about accountability.
Tom, your question says, could they be held accountable? That's a hypothetical when you ask it that way. Could they?
How about
The secretary's comfortable with the work that General Garrett did, and that there were deficiencies that were not only individualistic, but process deficiencies as well. And that's why, and he is holding the department accountable. If you look at his memo, he's ordering the department to on 5 key ways to make ourselves all more accountable to the actual process deficiencies that were conducted in this case.
But at the moment, I had a second one on another topic. You mentioned the Israeli defense minister will be here later, is planning to be here later this week. Today, the Israeli military launched a 3-week exercise called Chariots of Fire. To be clear, I'm not going to ask you to share intelligence from the podium or anything like that, but I am curious, since this drill is underway, what relationship does the Pentagon have, like when Israel conducts drills like the one going on at the moment, in sharing information, observing, that type of thing?
I'm not tracking any role for us in this.
Generally speaking, I said, do we send observers when the Israeli military conduct drills?
I don't know, Tom. I mean, every nation's military is entitled to exercise and to train and to improve their capabilities. We have exercised and trained with Israeli defense forces. We have a strong partnership with them, a strong military-to-military relationship. I do not know what role, if any, we have as observers or involved at all in this exercise.
The Israelis just put out that the U.S. Air Force would be involved.
I don't have that. Okay, that you got something I don't have then.
Well, I mean, I don't know that. That's just what the
I don't know.
alert.
I'll take the question and get back to you. You got me on that one. I wasn't prepared for that one. Yes,
On Baghuz strike, John, you made several times when we talk about this strike, you compared U.S. treatment to the civilian casualty claims to the Russian treatment to these types of operations. In Mariupol, we have seen Russians striking a building where kids and civilians were, and we have been reporting about this. That could be a war crime. But in this case, we have seen that the women, children are being killed. Yes, you are coming up speaking to these issues in a transparent way, but that doesn't change the fact that the United States military have killed dozens of kids and women. Why are you making a comparison with the Russians and just trying to justify the United States?
Not trying to justify anything. Not at all. The difference is we're admitting that, yes, we killed some innocent civilians, women and children, in 2019 in Baghuz, Syria. It's all out there for you to see. We're admitting that we made those mistakes, that we killed, that our operations ended up in the killing of innocent people. And we do it, and when we, in other instances, have been able to prove that, we've been able to say that. But I do think it's important to note the difference here, and I make no apologies for this. Here I am up here, standing here, reading out the results of a review of an investigation of an incident that happened, 3 years ago, in Syria, with as much detail as we can, and with as much openness and transparency as we can. And you talked about Mariupol, and you can look at places like Bucha, and Kyiv, and Chernihiv, and Kharkiv. We can go on and on and on about how many thousands of Ukrainian innocent people have been killed and wounded and flung into refuge by a reckless and unprovoked invasion from another nation, in this case Russia, with zero discussion or zero admission of their own guilt in that. Zero recognition that they and their soldiers have committed war crimes. Now again, I'm not trying to deflect this. We're up here talking about it, and I'll stand up here all day and we can talk about Baghuz as long as you want. And the documents are going to be in your inbox if they aren't already. You can look at it yourself. We'll stand up and talk about Baghuz all you want, and I'm happy to admit that we have got work to do. And that's why the Secretary, again, publicly stood up a whole team just to get better at civilian harm mitigation. But I don't think it's inappropriate for us in this day and moment, at this particular time, to not consider what's going on in Ukraine by the Russians at their hand. I do think that that's a fair thing to put into some context here. That's the difference between a responsible modern military and an irresponsible modern military.
Yeah, but as long as there is no accountability, what is the meaning of speaking all day or publishing all these pages by pages of reports?
We are holding ourselves accountable. We're letting you see everything. Now, did anybody get fired because of Baghuz? No. But it's not because we're trying to protect careers. General Garrett had a completely independent look at this strike, Kasim. I can't change the facts. I didn't do the review. He did. And the Secretary chose a 4-star who was completely separate from this to go look at this. And he came back and said that there were no violations of law of war. There was no need to hold somebody personally accountable for what happened that day. I mean, again, I think it's important to remember the ground force commander had certain information available to him. Information, and that Garrett had information in hindsight that he didn't have. But given the information that he had at the time, he made the best decisions he could in the fog of war, in the midst of combat, against a very determined enemy in a concentrated part of territory in Syria, who were fighting very, very aggressively against our SDF counterparts. You make the best decisions you can in war. Do you get it right every time? No. And that's regrettable for all of us. We actually do feel bad about this. But I don't think it's at all a statement that we're not holding ourselves accountable. We are. And the Secretary wouldn't have sent a memo today ordering changes to the way we handle these processes if we weren't willing to hold ourselves accountable.
Why isn't General Garrett here answering the questions, John?
I think that we've been as transparent as we can be here, Jen. I mean,
It seems like he and the ground commander, those would be the people who should answer the questions. And let's not forget that it was the New York Times that caused this review to take place.
Not questioning that at all.
It would not have been taken place without reporters looking into it.
I'm not denying that the New York Times report spurred this review. I mean, that's one of the most valuable things about a free press is you find things out that maybe we weren't aware of, and you make us think a little bit harder about it. You make us dive a little deeper in that, and that's that's to the press's credit. But again, we've been very open about this particular review. You can see the documents for yourself. Yeah, Joe.
Hey, John, thanks. 2 questions here. You mentioned Neptune Shield. Has that exercise been modified in any way in light of the ongoing conflict in Ukraine? And also, there's a Balt Ops exercise that usually happens in June. Will that take place as planned or be modified as
You'd have
scheduled?
to talk to Naval Forces Europe and NATO Striking Fleet. I don't know. I don't know what modifications were done on the exercise or what that means for ball tops. I don't know.
Okay, and Greek media is reporting that Greece is seeking to be part of the F-35 program and that Lockheed is also interested in Greece joining. Does the Pentagon support Greece buying the F-35?
Referring to my State Department colleagues, they handle all foreign military sales. Why is that funny?
I think it's great because I knew it was coming, that's all. I just love it. Boom. I always like to time it between the end of the question and that response. It's just fun.
Fair enough. I'm glad that's good for you. Yeah?
I would like to go back to the Sixth Fleet. The Kearsarge group is expected to arrive in Stockholm very shortly. First, can you confirm that? And second, is it linked to the fact that Sweden has started the process to join NATO?
I don't think there's any connection between a port visit and Sweden's decision to seek NATO membership. I won't talk about ship schedules, though. I mean, I don't think we have ever gotten in the business of talking about exact schedules for ships and port visits. But there's no connection to a port visit in Stockholm to Sweden's desire to seek NATO membership. No. Yeah.
Two quick questions. In terms of, so defense officials have mentioned that the likeliness of this war, it could go on for a while. Is the DoD tracking any possible equipment, personnel, or technology bottlenecks that the Russians might have to overcome to continue to prosecute this war?
I think we've already talked about the fact that that we know Mr. Putin is having trouble being able to purchase some necessary electronic components to his precision-guided munitions, and that's based a lot on the, we believe, the pressure that that the sanctions have put on his defense industrial base. But beyond that, I don't have a specific example. Yeah.
And then it seems that the Ukrainians are making some progress on a couple fronts, most notably around Kharkiv. After the Shogu call, Austin mentioned that there should be calls for a ceasefire. The UK has said that's a little too early. Do you think that a possible ceasefire could actually harm the Ukrainian counteroffensive in some of these areas?
I think we all want to see the fighting end, and that's what the Secretary is referring to, an end to the conflict. What we're doing in the meantime is trying to provide as many advantages to the Ukrainian armed forces as we can so that they are in a better position on the battlefield. And should there be a negotiation, a negotiated end to it, that they're in a better position at the negotiating table as well. Motion.
Can you tell us about the Secretary of the Navy's visit to the USS George Washington today? What his message was to sailors and what he wanted the sailors to know? Also, did he take questions? What were some of the concerns that were raised by sailors during the visit?
My understanding is that the Secretary wanted to get a chance to personally talk to sailors and to leadership at aboard the ship to get a handle on what they're doing to accommodate the needs of sailors that are working in this environment. I know that many sailors have moved off the ship. I think almost all by now have moved off the ship, and I think Secretary Del Toro wanted to see eyes on for himself what the conditions are on the ship, get a chance to talk to sailors and hear their concerns. My understanding, I wasn't there most, but my understanding was he did get a chance to talk directly with sailors and to hear their concerns. Look, they've got an investigation going on into the loss of life there on the George Washington, and obviously we don't want to get ahead of that, but it's clear that Navy leadership is taking this issue very seriously.
Was there any indication of a change in mood or atmosphere on the ship in recent weeks? And can you talk a little bit more about what the Navy's doing to make sure that sailors are more comfortable and that they're getting access to mental health?
I can't speak to the mood on the ship. I'd refer you to Navy officials to talk about what the crew's morale is right now. Look, I've served on 3 ships. Each one of the 3 ships I served on had a yard period. Nothing like a refueling for an aircraft carrier. That takes years. That's a much different environment. But a shipyard period, that's hard for any sailor. When you join the Navy, you join to exercise your skills, and you want to do that at sea. So it's tough duty. And I'm sure the Secretary had a chance to see for himself the conditions on the GW, which again, a ship is not meant to be penned up in a yard. It's a difficult environment, and it's very clear that the Navy's taken the conditions seriously and the concerns of the sailors seriously. They're beginning to move like I said, most of them are off the ship now. Some of them were living on there. They're moving them off, and they're finding accommodations for them. And they're making available to them mental health counseling and support, making it clear to the crew that that it's a strength, not a weakness, to ask for support, and they're making that support available to them. But again, for more detail on what's going on in the ship, I'd point you to the Navy. Yeah, I haven't gotten anybody on the phone here. Phil Stewart.
Hey, John. Real quick, on the August 29th strike in Kabul, have the families of the victims received any condolence payments yet? Have any been brought to the United States? If you could update us on that. And sorry if I missed something on that. And then secondly, there have been reports that Putin is taking personal control or command of some aspects of this war, perhaps out of frustration with his progress. Could you comment on that? Thanks.
Second question. On your first question, I don't have anything to report with respect to ex gratia payments or transportation of the family from Afghanistan at this point. What was your second question?
About Putin and whether or not he is personally kind of getting involved in managing the war.
Again, Phil, we don't have perfect visibility into the upper levels of command of the Russian military. He is, as president of the Russian Federation, he is ultimately in charge of his military. We know that that he was involved in the planning of this invasion from the very earliest days, and we know that that he has remained in contact with his senior civilian and military leaders throughout it. Now, exactly what he's hearing from them, how accurate that is, and how that affects whatever decisions he's making, we couldn't say. Jeff Selden.
John, thanks very much for doing this. Question regarding the Inspector General report on Afghanistan, which warned that the Taliban might start to loosen restrictions on al-Qaeda. How worried is the Pentagon that the Taliban are preparing to go back on their word from the Doha Agreement? And the report also talked about the Taliban making what it called incremental gains with repairing and deploying some of the aircraft that the Taliban captured. How big of a concern is that to regional stability moving forward?
On al-Qaeda, we've long said that we're going to judge the Taliban by what they do, not what they say, and we have acknowledged that, as I said earlier, that al-Qaeda could try to achieve a stronger foothold in Afghanistan. It's not like they weren't there before; they were, and one of the things that we were watching for before the president's decision to order the removal of troops from Afghanistan was, in fact, the degree to which the Taliban were abiding by their Doha commitments to not provide safe haven to al-Qaeda, and we weren't able to ascertain 100% that they were willing and able to do that. So we're watching this as closely as we can. Is it of concern? Of course, it's of concern. Nobody wants to see al-Qaeda regain any kind of tangible footprint in Afghanistan or any ability to plan or attack outside the region again. That's why we're monitoring it. That's why we're closely watching it. That's why we're continuing to work on an over-the-horizon counterterrorism capability. On the aircraft thing, I haven't seen that part of the report, so I'm just going to take your question and we'll see if we can get you a better answer. But I'll leave it at that. Mike Brest, Washington.
Hi, thank you. CENTCOM told the New York Times at the time they came out with their piece on the Syrian strike that there were 16 confirmed fighters among the 80 that died. Only 4 were civilians. Can you speak to the other 60 people who CENTCOM couldn't identify as either a friendly or a fighter, and address if we know how many civilian casualties were even in the strike?
I'm not going to relitigate the investigation. General Garrett did a review of the investigation. What I can tell you was that there was a total of 73 casualties. 52 enemies were killed in action. Of those 52, 51 were adult males, 1 was a child. 2 enemies were wounded in action, both were males. 4 civilians were killed, 1 female and 3 children, and 15 civilians were wounded, 11 women and 4 children. That was the result of General Garrett's review of the CENTCOM investigation. Karen from Washington Post.
That was actually my exact question about the if we knew the actual numbers of fatalities and casualties. And it's I rolled off a lot of numbers there, so we're good.
Shogul.
Thank you. During today's UAP hearing, a congressman asked whether the Defense Department has the capability to monitor for UAPs underwater. The congressman was told this was a matter for a closed session. So I was hoping to reframe his question. Is DOD looking for UAPs underwater?
I'm not going to even attempt that one, Jeff. If it's a matter for a closed session with Congress, I think you can understand why we wouldn't be talking about that from the podium. Okay, Gordon.
I was asking a question back on accountability. I think what fuels a lot of the questions is this idea that even when the Pentagon chooses an independent 4-star, separate from the operation and all that, the person is still cut from the same cloth, culture, and the rest of it. Has the Secretary given any thought to like further distancing some of these reviews, which are critical to your own scrutiny of these operations, away from, as best or more so, from the culture and the operations that
look, I think it's got to be a balance, but somebody also has to be informed and educated and experienced in military operations as well. So look, he stood up a civilian harm mitigation and response action plan. Secretary Mayer is putting that team together. I suspect that they're going to look at a whole range of things that we can do better to both prevent civilian harm and then to properly investigate ourselves afterward. So I don't want to get ahead of that work. They might very well find that that as we review investigations, maybe that could be done differently. I don't know. But the Secretary had ultimate trust and confidence, complete trust and confidence in General Garrett's ability to do this, given his own lengthy experience in the military and his distance from this. He wasn't involved in this and was able to be objective about it. Look, I understand the questions about accountability. I get it. We take each one as it comes, and each one, if it's not properly investigated, you've seen us be willing to go back in and reinvestigate it. And that includes the 29 August airstrike in Kabul. In war, not every decision goes exactly as you predict it will. Not every action you take has all the effects that you want it to have. And as hard as we work, and I'll say it again, no other military in the world works harder than the United States military to prevent and to not cause civilian harm. It's impossible to get to zero in every case during every conflict. It's just impossible. The difference is that we do hold ourselves accountable. I know you don't think we do because nobody got fired, but the department holds itself accountable because we're actually investigating these things. And even when we don't think the investigation maybe it needs to be looked at again, we look at it again. And then we make those results public. We talk about it. We answer questions about it. That's holding ourselves to account. I get it. I understand it. You know, there are some who would like to see, jobs lost, positions fired, and we're not afraid to do that in many cases throughout the department. But it's war, and the decisions we make, we want to look and see if those decisions were the right ones in the moment, with the information that they had available to them, with the actual, tangible, lethal threat in their face. And in this case, and I'm not going to relitigate every case, but in this case, General Garrett found that the ground force commander made the best decisions that he could, given the information he had at the time, given a very lethal, very aggressive ISIS threat in a very confined space. And it is deeply regrettable. We deeply regret we apologize for the loss of innocent life that was taken in this particular strike. It matters to us. It matters so much to us that the Secretary of Defense wanted a review of this investigation done, and the Secretary of Defense personally has now issued guidance to the department to get better at the deficiencies that General Garrett found. And we're going to keep working at this, Gordon. We're not always going to get it right, but we're always going to try to get it right, and we're going to try to talk about what we're doing to get it right. And I think that's remarkable. Okay, thank you.